Hey folks, my name's Emily Hostetler. My students call me Professor Haas. I'm an English composition instructor here at Sonoma State for a long time. Perhaps some of you might even be in my class when you start in the fall. I hope so. We have a lot of fun. We do lots of serious work, but we also have a lot of fun doing it. I'm also the Writing Center faculty director. So I think the Summer Bridge folks talked to you about the Learning and Academic Resource Center. We call it LARC. And that's where we have free peer tutoring in all subjects, but especially in writing. And even right now, you can get a remote Zoom tutoring appointment to help with your essay in this class and to get some feedback on it. But especially in the fall, alongside your composition course, you can come to us weekly as you develop as a writer to get some help with revision and drafting and brainstorming, all the different things. But today, I'm here to give you 3 specific strategies to help you get going on this draft you have to work on right now. And I think just tackling the most difficult part of writing, at least for myself, which is getting started and getting it done. In your college composition classrooms, you're going to hear this emphasis on process writing, right? Which is another way of saying doing it piecemeal in bits, building on it, right? A scaffolding rather than that panicked, stressful 1 hour before I hit the submit button, I'm going to throw this thing together. So this is supposed to be a little bit less of a labor, right? Working in bits. And you've already done quite a bit of that work by annotating these 2 readings, having discussions with them, with each other, thinking about them personally, reflecting on your personal experiences, especially as they relate to education and what that means and how we truly define that. And yeah, you've probably done a bunch of free writing too. So you've actually got a lot of what you need to start writing now. So I'm going to help you get going. All right, I'm sharing my screen. Bear with me. All right, and here we go. So I inserted some pictures of my students working in class. I thought that was fun. And then just this little quote that I like: every piece of writing comes to being through many processes, right? Some of them in the physical act of writing, but much of it in the incubation and thinking part. I I like to gather my materials before I start drafting and sort of lay them all out in front of me. For you, that might happen virtually on the screen, and that's fine. But if you're one of those folks who likes to write in a notebook, then go ahead right now and get a notebook. If you printed out the readings or you have copies on them on another device, have them in front of you. If you took notes during your dialogues, have that sitting within reach. There's a couple different ways to kind of manage through this material that I'm covering. I'm gonna move myself over here. So one way is to pause in between each of the sort of mini lessons that I give you to help you work on your paper as you're listening to me talk. Another way is to just listen to everything and then go back piecemeal. You can minimize the screen and write into an open Word document, but I do recommend writing something down. That's what works best for me. We know from the prompt that you were given that you want to have an introduction, you're going to want to have a thesis, and you're going to want to have some body paragraphs and like the stuff to include in those paragraphs. So I'd like you to walk away feeling like you have that going. I'm going to do that with a pre-writing technique, some idea generating, and then a little bit of talk about crafting introductions, and then just a reminder on outlining and paragraph structure. So my hope, right, is that I'm providing you with this tool these different tools while you're simultaneously creating the content for your draft. So I really like this brainstorming technique. we know you're going to be comparing and analyzing the two essays that you read, and then also connecting yourself to them and your own experiences, and that you're going to tie all that together with a thesis or an opinion about education, right? And what that means, and eventually a conclusion. So you could take a piece of paper, and you may have done this in the past, and divide it into 3 sections. One that's your educational experience, one that's the Baldwin piece, a talk to teachers, and then one's the Laura Cooper piece, right? And there's a couple different ways, but right now you're just pulling out some similarities that stood out to you, right? Your own experiences, or some similarities that you noted in both of the readings, maybe some differences, maybe just key moments that are resonating with you, right? There's some sections of these essays that were really profound for me to read, or just hit me, right, in a certain way. And because there's a lot of material, you're gonna wanna hone in and narrow down what themes in those essays, what quotes were most meaningful to you. So you should just take some time and go ahead and list those kind of main things out and see what comes up for you that you can string together. You're isolating the most important imagery to you, right? Or where you got the most meaning in each of these essays. So take some time to make those lists. Don't worry about your writing in these lists. You're just kind of throwing out bullet points and reminders of quotes you're going to go back to, or moments that you just haven't been able to stop thinking about that came up for you while you were doing the reading. So you can go ahead and pause here and write that, or you can go ahead and come back to this moment later. But really generating stuff right now in these columns is going to help you with the content for your paragraphing later on. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about introductions. And you've probably been told quite a bit about what makes an introduction interesting. In college level writing, this doesn't go away. In fact, college introductions tend to get more lengthy than the papers you've probably written in the past for high school or in other learning environments. So you really get to be creative with those intros in a way that maybe you haven't been before. I wanted to remind you of a couple different types of introductions you can do that are really juicy for your reader. So one is the personal anecdote. I'm thinking a defining educational moment would be a great type of mini story or vignette to tell, to open this essay with. You may have noticed that the 2 readings you got had some pretty compelling openers, right? So those are great models of how to open an essay in a way that truly draws the reader in. You can use sensory-based language in your opener. So by that, I mean inserting the reader into a moment by providing them with what it felt like. What was the sky like? What did it smell like? What were you hearing? You can actually have dialogue. So if you were doing a defining educational moment, say someone in your family always has this quote about education or about school or about homework, right? You could even have that little dialogue as your opener. You've probably been told that starting with a provocative question is one way to bring the reader in, or a compelling fact or statistic. And those are fine too. I just, when I looked at this prompt, I thought, well, you're already inserting yourself into this dialogue. Why not start with an anecdote? In addition to those 2 components, right, that those first couple sentences, or perhaps that first paragraph now, because you can spend a little bit more time on it, you're going to be orienting the reader to what it is that you're doing, right? You're going to be analyzing these two readings as they pertain to this idea that you're thinking about education. Maybe there's something problematic there about how education has been defined for you. So that's where you'll sort of orient your reader into what you're going to do in this essay, give them the roadmap, and then you're going to have that thesis. And I'm not going to talk a lot about the thesis. That's something you're going to be working on more. But we like to call it a working thesis in the college classroom because we don't want you to feel like it's done, right? It evolves as you're working on the essay, and often you'll write your whole essay and then go back to that thesis and say, hey, does it actually line up with the paragraphs that I ended up writing? How can I tweak it? So those are some tips for that introduction. So maybe that's gotten you thinking about what that introduction is going to look like, and you want to start writing right now. And if you don't, you can just keep moving ahead and come back to that in a minute. All right, so looking at my notes here, I want to give you some reminders about how to structure those paragraphs, right? You've got the introduction, you've got the thesis, and then you have those body paragraphs where you're going to be toggling, right, between analyzing both of those readings and then your own sort of impressions of them. So one way to do that in a structured way that helps the reader sort of anticipate where you're going and provides you with like a cozy sequence to follow is this pie paragraph illustration. And so I've seen this all sorts of ways. You might already have been exposed to this idea, but that's like starting with your point, having some information in the middle, and then an explanation of that information, you know, at its basic. Some folks call it persuading, and then informing, and then entertaining or expressing. All of these are just ways of saying, of making things easier for your readers to understand what it is that you're doing and trying to achieve. So I like to start with my point in every paragraph, the topic sentence, right? What is the rest of this paragraph going to be about? And then there's that, right? Those cherries in the middle, right? How are you supporting that point? And in this case, you're probably going to be supporting it with examples from both of those essays that you read and or, right, your own experiences. And that's really where that explanation piece comes in. When you give examples, either through summary or quote, or paraphrasing what you read, you're going to want to spend a lot of time in that paragraph explaining why, right, that's relevant, why you selected that specific quote or that summary or that moment in the reading to illustrate your point in your own words. So you can repeat, right, this particular structure throughout all your points and for all of your paragraphs, even though the content's going to be different. I personally am one of these folks who I just write everything out. It's almost like stream of consciousness. Often, you know, I struggle with punctuation sometimes. I kind of go on these little tangents. And so I actually like to write in my paper like P, I, and E to help create the outline, or go back after I've written the paragraph with this in mind and see if I actually did it. So did I articulate like a clear topic sentence? Did I actually support evidence, right, or provide an example of that point? And then did I spend the most time in my own words sort of unpacking what I said? All right. So at this point, I hope that you've gotten inspired a little bit for what to do here. And so I definitely recommend outlining as a process that works really well for me. But I think, like I mentioned earlier, makes this process of putting the essay together a little less labor intensive. And it gives you a map, and you can kind of plug into that map and then put it aside and come back to it later. You can move things around, but I like to set up this structure as a way to hold myself accountable for filling everything in. So I would just do this on a separate piece of paper or in your Google document or your Word document. Just actually write out with like Roman numerals or numbers or bullet points, these specific sections, right? So we're going to have that introduction, right? We know because that's requested in the prompt. Maybe it's going to be this anecdote we have an idea of. We're going to have a thesis, and then we're going to have a structured paragraph, right? And a kind of planned paragraph. And all of our paragraphs will be 3 or 4 different points that we hopefully pull from that column document that we made earlier, where we got our ideas from and where we took the most meaning from those texts that we read. So you can Google, right? Google is your friend. You can Google all sorts of kinds of outlines to help you stay structured when you're writing. One pattern that I often see for comparative analysis essays is called the optional A-B pattern. So that's where you keep everything that I said in the last slide. You have your topic sentence, but you'll toggle back and forth in the same way in each paragraph. So first you'll speak to the Baldwin essay, and then you'll speak to the Laura Cooper essay, right back to back within each paragraph, and then you. So maybe it's more like A, B, and C, and you'll maintain that pattern even though it'll be different content in each paragraph as you go along. So that's really formulaic, right? I'll be honest, it's formulaic and it's expected, but it's a great starting place, and you can add the finesse later. You can move things around and shift them later on, but this will just give you something to start with, to feel really grounded in the framework of where you're going with the essay. And then, of course, you're going to have a conclusion somewhere. We're not going to talk about that right now, but you want to have it on your radar. Or often, sometimes people start with the conclusion as a way to get to their thesis. So, all right. So, you've got all these tools now, right? It's time to go and write if you haven't been writing along and stopping along the way. I like to use a timer in little bits, especially during this shelter in place. Otherwise, I get distracted by something shiny or the dog or the children that you might have heard in the background of this recording. And so working in small increments on each section of an outline or a piece that I'm writing works really well for me. I gave you a suggested timeline here. Go back to those columns, right? Think about, well, was there, as you know, when you look at all three of them, what are the themes? What's resonating with you? These are some heavy readings. Our relationship to learning and to education is very personal, right? And can be very intense for many of us, but that is great fuel for this essay. So see, you know, where you're getting those feelings in real specific moments in the essays. Give yourself 10 minutes to rework on that and really think about those bullet points that you put down. Give yourself some time to incubate those connections for your working thesis. What are you walking away from this thinking? What is this so what? What's your big takeaway after you've done these two readings and sort of thought about where you're sitting now? Create that outline, even with nothing in it, right? Just the bones of it. It has so much value, and it really helps with accountability. Spend some time on that introduction. I often tell my students to do two different versions of an introduction, one that's a personal anecdote, for example, and then one that's maybe something they're a little bit more used to, like a statistic or a song lyric or some other type of device you've been given to open an essay with. And then you can kind of look at both of them and see, well, which one really serves the purpose of my essay and which one might my reader take away more with. And then you've got to plug through those paragraphs, those body paragraphs, right? Your 3 to 6 different points, and then the examples of those. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop this share. I hope all of this is getting you going, getting you feeling confident or motivated, or just giving you a structure with which to start. This is a draft, right? Just get it all out there. It's supposed to be messy. And it's supposed to feel a little bit undone. And it's supposed to have room to grow. So with that, I'm going to leave you to it. And I really look forward to meeting you when we get on campus or when we get back to more remote experiences like this in Zoom. All right. Happy drafting.